I had been a widow for 11 days when I learned my husband had kept a secret from me for most of our marriage. It wasn't another woman. It wasn't another family. It wasn't debt or shame or any of the things your mind runs toward in the dark. It was a place, a lake house in northern Wisconsin that he had inherited before I knew him, paid taxes on alone, visited quietly, and for 22 years refused to take me to. Every time I asked, he gave me the same answer in the same even tone. Not that place, Nora. Promise me. He never raised his voice. He never turned it into an argument. That was almost what made it more effective. He simply made it sound settled, like a decision that had already been made somewhere else, in a room I hadn't been invited to and didn't need revisiting. So I let it stay settled. Marriage, if it lasts long enough, teaches you which doors not to push on. My name is Nora. I'm 62 years old. And this story started on a quiet October morning in my kitchen in Rochester, Minnesota, 11 days after my husband's funeral, when everything I thought I understood about our life together began to rearrange itself. The morning it started, I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug. I had already forgotten I'd finished. It was just after 7. The light outside was thin and grey, the kind you get in late October when the trees have mostly given up, and the sky can't decide whether it wants to be day at all. My house had become quiet in a particular way after Daniel died. Not peaceful, just organized silence. The refrigerator hummed. The baseboard heater clicked once. Somewhere down the block, a truck backed up with that long mechanical beeping sound people stop hearing after years in the same neighborhood. Grief, I had discovered, was not dramatic most of the time. It was administrative. It arrived in envelopes, passwords, and certified copies. It asked you to sign things while you were still trying to understand what had happened. Daniel had been many things during our 22 years of marriage, but above all, he had been steady, quiet, private in a way I never fully challenged, because I had convinced myself that privacy and secrecy were cousins when sometimes they are not. My phone rang just after 9. Martin Kessler, Daniel's attorney. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, in that careful professional tone attorneys use when they're trying not to sound urgent. "There's one additional matter. It concerns a property in Wisconsin. I'd prefer to do this in person." I stood still with one hand on the counter, the dish towel still in my other hand. Outside, a gust pushed the last few leaves across the driveway, scraping along the concrete. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything began. Martin's office was on the 3rd floor of an older brick building near the courthouse, the kind with brass directory plates in the lobby, and a hallway that always smelled faintly of dust and copier. Toner. When I sat down in the conference room, there was a small box on the table in front of my chair. Inside was an old brass key on a plain leather tag. Beneath it, a folded letter in Daniel's handwriting. Martin waited until I looked up before he spoke. "The lake house," he said, "is now solely in your name." He slid a deed copy across the table. Then a property tax statement. Then a transfer document already recorded with the county. My name. Only mine. "There's more," he said. "Your husband spent the last 2 years restoring the property. He paid for everything through a separate account fully disclosed in his records. He left instructions that you were to visit before making any decision regarding sale, occupancy, or disposition." I looked down at the letter but didn't open it yet. I was still looking at the deed, at my name where I had never expected to see it. Then Martin cleared his throat and added one more thing. "Daniel's sister has already contacted my office. She believes the property should remain with his side of the family." She was quite direct about that. Quite direct. That was lawyer language for something ruder. I opened the letter. It was brief. He apologized for the secrecy. He asked me to go there just once. He wrote that what I found would explain why he'd kept me away. At the bottom, under his name, he had written a password on a separate line. I folded the paper carefully and set it back in the box. Then I asked Martin for certified copies of every property document, every renovation invoice, and the full account history. I asked whether anyone besides me had legal authority over the property. He said no. I asked whether Daniel's sister could enter, sell, list, or represent the house without my signature. Absolutely not, he said. That was the moment I understood there would be two versions of this situation. The emotional one people would try to push on me, and the documented one already sitting on the table. I chose the table. I did not drive to the lake house right away. That surprises people when I tell this story. But I've learned that walking into an emotional situation without paperwork is how you end up apologizing in a room where you actually have authority. So I went home, made coffee, and pulled the metal file box from the hall closet, the one with hanging folders labeled in Daniel's neat block handwriting. Taxes, insurance, utilities, property, WI. The Wisconsin folder was thicker than the one for our actual home. That's when the memories started surfacing. Not all at once. One at a time. The way things do when you're finally paying attention. The first one came from about 4 years earlier. Daniel was in the garage, standing at his workbench with a small radio playing low some AM station that always sounded slightly out of tune. I could smell motor oil and cold air because he had the side door cracked open. He was sanding something. A long, slow motion. Back and forth. Back and forth. I asked, almost casually, if we should sell the lake house someday and use the money to travel more. He didn't stop sanding. Not that place, Nora. That place is for later. At the time, I heard avoidance. Now I heard something else entirely. That was not a man avoiding a place. That was a man with a plan. The second memory came that night, going through the Wisconsin folder. About 2 years ago, Daniel had come home late on a Thursday. His coat smelled like sawdust and cold air, not the office. I was at the stove stirring soup, and I asked where he'd been. Up north, he said. Had to check on something. I asked if everything was okay. He took a bowl, sat at the table, and after a long pause said, I'm building something you'll understand later. Then he changed the subject and asked about Jenna's new job, like he'd said too much already. I had thought he meant something abstract, a plan, a feeling. I didn't realize he meant actual lumber and nails and windows. That evening, Daniel's sister called. Her name is Elaine. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention the funeral. She said, I heard you spoke to Martin. We should talk about the lake house. It's really a family property. I stood by the kitchen counter and listened to the sound of her breathing and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then I said, I'm reviewing the documents. She paused, then said, well, just remember where that place came from. I want to stop here and say something about Elaine, because it would be easy to make her the villain of this story, and I don't think that's honest. Elaine had watched her brother buy a piece of the family's history, their father's lake house, and carry it forward for decades, keeping it alive. She had assumed, the way families often do, that this meant it still belonged to everyone in some essential way, not legally, emotionally. She had told people at Thanksgiving that the house was still in the family. She had probably imagined her grandchildren there someday. And then Daniel died, and a lawyer sent a letter, and the floor dropped out from under her. I understood that. I did. Her grief was real. Her sense of loss was real. But grief and legal authority are two different things, and only one of them gets to make decisions. The pressure came from both sides after that. Jenna. My daughter called the next morning to say Elaine had told her I was overwhelmed and that the family should handle the property situation so I didn't have to worry about it. I remember looking down at Daniel's renovation receipts while Jenna talked. Hardware stores, lumber yards, electrical contractors, roofing company. 2 years of careful spending that had never come out of our joint account. I said, no decisions will be made quickly. There was a long silence. Then Jenna said, Okay, in a way that told me she understood more than she was letting on. The third memory came the next afternoon, when I read Daniel's letter again slowly at my desk. I remembered a Sunday morning, about 6 months before he died. Steady rain, the kind that makes a house feel smaller. Daniel was sitting at this same desk, going through papers with a calculator and a yellow legal pad. I asked if he was doing taxes early. No, he said, just making sure everything is easy for you to find. I laughed a little and said, "You're not going anywhere." He looked at me for a moment the way he did when he was choosing his words carefully, and then said, very quietly, "Everyone goes somewhere. I'm just trying to leave the lights on. I went to the bank before I went to the lake house." Daniel had always believed that if you wanted to understand a person's real plans, you didn't start with what they said. You started with where the money went. The account manager, a woman named Laura, very calm, very precise, pulled up the account and turned the monitor so I could see the transaction history. 2 years of payments. Contractors, building supply companies, electrical, plumbing, landscaping, insurance, property tax. It wasn't a small project. It was a full reconstruction, done slowly and methodically, without ever becoming a topic of conversation at our dinner table. "No one else has access to this account," she said. "Only you." Then she scrolled through a log and added, "There was an inquiry yesterday. Someone called asking whether they could discuss the account on behalf of the family. We declined. They are not listed." The room was very quiet when she said that. I asked her to change the mailing address on the account and to require in-person ID verification for any future inquiries. She printed the forms, I signed them, and that was that. Procedure, not argument. From the bank, I walked 3 blocks to Martin's office in the cold. "I need to understand exactly what authority I have," I said, before he could speak, "and exactly what authority no one else has." He opened the deed and tapped the ownership line with his pen. "Your name is the only name on this document. That means no one can sell the property, list the property, or enter into a contract regarding the property without your written authorization. Not your sister-in-law, not your daughter. No one." I asked about the renovation costs, whether anyone could claim reimbursement or partial ownership, because the house had once been in the family. He shook his head. "Your husband purchased the property from the family estate 15 years ago. It has been legally his and now legally yours for quite some time. There is no shared ownership structure here." Then he leaned back and said something that sounded less like legal advice and more like orientation. "Mrs. Whitaker, you're not the guest in this situation. You're the client." I drove north the next morning. Late October in Wisconsin is a very specific color. Gray sky, dark water, yellow leaves already turning brown at the edges. The road narrowed. The farther I went from highway to county road, to a 2-lane stretch running between tall pines and small stretches of open water that flashed silver through the trees. I stopped once for gas and coffee and stood by the pump in the cold air, thinking about the fact that I was driving toward a place I had been married to for 22 years but had never seen. The lake house was at the end of a narrow road lined with pines. When I turned into the driveway, I slowed down without meaning to. The cabin, I had imagined some small worn thing with peeling paint and broken steps, was not what was in front of me. New roof, new windows, a wide wooden porch facing the lake, fresh gravel in the driveway, pale and recently laid. I parked and sat with the engine off. I could hear wind in the trees and the slow, steady rhythm of water hitting the shore. He hadn't been hiding this place from me. He had been building it. Inside, the house smelled like new wood, paint, and faintly coffee. There was a coffee maker on the kitchen counter, with a sealed container of Daniel's brand beside it. Even here, he had set up a normal morning. I walked through slowly. Living room facing the lake. a small office with built-in shelves, 2 bedrooms, and at the end of the hallway, a room with double doors. Inside was a writing desk in front of a wide window looking directly at the water. On the desk, a laptop and a yellow legal pad with Daniel's handwriting across the top page. A list, internet password, septic company number, snow removal service, property tax due dates, the same careful block letters he used on file folders at home. I stood there with my hand on the back of the chair and read the list twice, not to memorize it, just to understand the intention behind it. Then I opened the laptop and entered the password from the letter. There was one folder on the desktop with my name on it. Inside, scanned documents, contractor agreements, permits, insurance policies, and a single video file. I didn't open the video yet. I wasn't ready to hear his voice in that room. Not yet. Instead, I read through the documents. Building permits. Final inspection signed. Insurance listing me as co-insured, effective 6 months before he died. A property survey. And one more document that made me sit down slowly. A letter from a development company expressing interest in purchasing multiple shoreline parcels for a future resort project, specifically noting that Daniel's property was a key parcel required for project continuity. That was the lane nobody had named directly, but everybody had been moving toward. I printed the letter. I saved a copy to a flash drive from the drawer. Then I stopped and looked out at the lake for a while, because I could feel my hands beginning to shake, and I've learned not to make decisions while shaking. Elaine called that afternoon. "Have you talked to the realtor yet?" "I'm at the house," I said. A long pause. Then, "You shouldn't have gone there without us." I was looking at the new kitchen cabinets Daniel had installed, the careful measurements, the quiet work that had happened here. "There's a development company that wants this land," I said. Another pause. Different this time. Not surprised. Calculating. "Yes, well," she said. "That's why it would be smart to sell while the price is high. Daniel would have wanted everyone to benefit. Everyone. Family." Those words were doing a lot of work. "The letter is addressed to Daniel," I said. "Not to everyone." She said they'd already arranged a meeting with the development group on Thursday, that I should be there to sign the listing agreement. I looked at the printed letter in my hand, then at the deed copy in my folder. "There is no listing agreement," I said. A silence. Then, "Daniel wouldn't have cut his family out like that." I said nothing. "We've already told people the property is going on the market." I stood in that kitchen, holding the phone, looking at the lake through the window Daniel had installed. And I understood something very simple. They had been making plans using a house they did not own. "You can tell them whatever you want," I said. "But the paperwork says otherwise. We need to talk about this in person." "Come Thursday," I said. "Bring whoever you want." Then I hung up. I slept in the lake house that night for the first time. The wind was loud against the windows. The house made new house, sounds, small creaks and settling noises. I lay in the dark and thought about Daniel driving up here alone for 2 years, paying for lumber and wiring and windows, making lists on yellow paper, never announcing it, never arguing about it. He had just changed the structure, quietly. Thursday morning was cold and bright. The lake looked flat and metallic under a pale sun. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at the desk by the window with my folders in front of me. Deed copy, transfer record, bank summary, the developer's letter. I arranged them in a neat stack with a pen on top. Then I sat and looked at the water. Around 10, I heard cars on the gravel. I didn't rush to the door. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, set it carefully in the sink, then walked to the front of the house. Elaine came in first, without waiting to be invited. A long wool coat, that tight expression she wore when she thought she was the most organized person in the room. Behind her, her son, Mark. And behind him, a man in a suit with a leather folder. A listing agent. We stood in the living room, the four of us, with the lake visible through the big windows behind me. Everyone pretending this was a normal meeting. Elaine looked around at the new walls, the new windows, the wide porch beyond the glass. Something crossed her face, not greed exactly. Recognition. She was seeing what Daniel had built, what it was worth, and perhaps, for just a moment, what it must have cost him to do it quietly, without telling anyone. "Well," she said finally. "He certainly put money into it." "Yes," I said. "He did." The listing agent stepped forward and placed a document on the coffee table. A listing agreement, property address neatly typed at the top. I didn't sit down. I didn't touch the paper. I walked to the desk, picked up my folder, and brought it to the coffee table. I placed the deed copy on top of his listing agreement and slid it toward him. He looked at it, then at me, then at the paper again. Elaine said, "We're all here to sign so we can move forward." "There's nothing for you to sign," I said. The agent pointed to the agreement. "We just need the owner's signatures here and here." I tapped the deed with my finger. "My name is the only name on that document." The room went quiet. Mark picked up the deed copy and read it slowly, eyes moving across the page like he was looking for a second name that wasn't there. He handed it to Elaine. She read it once, then again, like the words might rearrange themselves if she looked long enough. "This must be temporary," she said. "Daniel would have wanted this to stay in the family." "It is in the family," I said. She looked up. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't have a response ready. I watched something move through her face, the anger, yes, but underneath it something older. She had loved her brother. She had told herself a story about this place and what it meant. And now that story had an ending she hadn't written. The agent gathered his papers slowly and left without another word. Elaine's voice changed then. The confidence was gone. In its place was something rawer. "You can't handle something like this alone. This is a multi-million-dollar deal. You're a school administrator, Nora. You don't know how these things work." I looked at the lake behind her, then back at the papers. "I know how signatures work," I said. "We were trying to make sure everyone was taken care of." "The accounts are already taken care of." Mark, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke. "So what happens now?" I answered him directly. "Now nothing happens quickly. If I decide to sell, I will choose the agent. If I decide to keep it, I will keep it. But no one is signing anything today." Elaine sat down slowly, like the energy had gone out of her all at once. "We already told the developer you were cooperative. Then you should call them back and correct that." No one spoke for a while after that. The lake outside was completely still. Eventually, they left. No shouting, no slammed doors, just quiet footsteps on the porch and the sound of tires on gravel. I stood in the living room alone again, with the listing agreement still on the table under my deed copy. I hadn't won anything in that moment. I had just enforced what was already written. That night, after I had called Martin, after I had rinsed the cups and put the folders away and stood on the porch for a while, in the cold, listening to the lake, I finally opened the video file. I wasn't ready before. But I think you're never ready. You just reach a point where the not knowing is heavier than the knowing. The video opened on Daniel, sitting in that same chair at the desk, the lake visible through the window behind him. He was wearing a flannel shirt. I recognized dark green, worn soft at the elbows. He looked tired, but settled. The way a person looks when they've finished something that took a long time. He sat quietly for a moment before he spoke, like he was finding the right place to start. "Nora, just my name first." The way he said it, when we were alone and he wasn't filling silence, just acknowledging that I was there. "If you're watching this, it means you finally came up here." He smiled slightly, the private one, not the social one. "I know you wanted to come for years. I know you let it go because I asked you to, and I never fully explained why. That wasn't fair to you. I'm sorry for that." He looked out at the water for a moment. I needed this place to be finished first. I needed it to be yours completely, legally, clearly yours, before it became everyone's problem. Because I knew it would become everyone's problem. You know how these things go. He folded his hands on the desk, the same gesture he made at our kitchen table when he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a long time. The development company has been acquiring this shoreline for years. The neighbors sold quietly. This is the last parcel. That means the price will keep going up, not down. It also means there will be pressure. People get very loud when money is near water. He paused. I didn't want you in the middle of that without the paperwork finished, without a position. I wanted you to walk into that room, whatever room it turned out to be, and already have everything you needed. So no one could tell you what you were allowed to decide. He was quiet again for a moment. Outside in the video, behind him through the window, I could see the lake grey and still, the same lake I was looking at now, except it was a different season, the trees still full. If you love it, keep it. If you need the money, sell it, but make the decisions slowly. Make it on paper, not in a living room full of opinions. He looked directly at the camera, then directly at me, the way he used to look at me across the kitchen table when he wanted me to hear something past the words. I know I kept too much to myself. I've known that for a long time. Some things I couldn't find the right way to say out loud, but I want you to know this place is the closest I ever got. He reached forward, and the screen went dark. I sat in that chair for a long time afterward. The lake was black outside, and the wind had come up, and I could hear it moving through the pines. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there with my hand on the desk and let the quiet be what it was. The rest of it resolved the way these things do, not dramatically, but procedurally. Martin sent a formal letter establishing me as sole legal owner. 2 days later, Elaine called to say she'd received it, her voice careful now, walking across a floor she wasn't sure would hold. You didn't have to do that, she said. I didn't do it to you, I said. I did it for clarity. She was quiet for a long time. Then, so what are you going to do with the place? I'm not selling it. A pause. She sounded genuinely surprised. You're not? No. I looked out the window at the small maple tree Daniel had planted the year we moved in. Most of the leaves were gone. Winter was close. That weekend I drove back up with a longer list. Snow removal company, local bank branch, hardware store. I met the man who ploughed the road in winter. I introduced myself to the neighbor at the end of the road, an older man who had known Daniel for years. He was up here all the time these past 2 years, the man told me. Said he was getting things ready. Getting things ready. I set up a trust in my name with the property inside it. I responded to the development company with a short letter saying any future discussions would go through my attorney and that I was not currently listing for sale. After that, the phone calls mostly stopped. Jenna came up in December. We stood on the porch in heavy coats, looking out at the frozen lake. I think he built this for you, she said. Somewhere that was completely yours. I think so too, I said. Elaine and I had one more conversation, months later. Not about the property, about Daniel. Old stories, holidays. The sharp edge had worn down, because there was nothing left to negotiate. The structure had been decided long before any of us walked into that living room. That's the thing I want to leave you with. Arguments are loud. Paperwork is quiet. But paperwork is final. People will tell you what's fair, what's expected, what your husband would have wanted. They will use words like family and everyone in ways that are meant to include them and exclude you. They will try to make you feel that the room you're standing in isn't yours. And in that moment, the only thing that matters is whether you know the difference between an opinion and a deed. I still go to the lake house every few weeks. In the morning, the light comes through the wide window and hits the desk where Daniel used to sit. And now I sit there, with my coffee and my lists and the sound of the water. He didn't get to stay. but he left the lights on, and I finally know the way in.